And then
Hello.
when you're ready.
Okay. Hello. Good morning, everybody. We hope that you're well. Give us a thumbs up. Hello, a wave, all of that. Hello. Oh, nice. Awesome. It's
Perfect.
nice to see so many waves and good faces as well. So welcome to lecture 2 of Phantasy Saturday School lecture series in conjunction with 198. This project is supported by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, so thanks to them. And it's so nice to see you all again for our second installment. I'm Rochelle. I'm Rochelle White. I am a multidisciplinary artist. Some of you may have met me last lecture. And I'm really looking forward to getting into this. I also run East, and we have Hamid and Arena on board with us as well. So, hello.
Good morning. My name is Hamid. I am an interdisciplinary artist. And yeah, been working alongside Rochelle, Paula, and 198 on this project. And yeah, just excited to get into lecture 2. And today we have Maxwell Murray, who will be presenting some research work slash work in progress. And then we have Osei Bonsu, who is curator of international art at Tate,
Yes.
which will be delivering our main lecture. So just to quickly run through today's housekeeping rules, which should have been sent this morning, just to reiterate to everyone. Also, we received your feedback from last week, so we tweaked the housekeeping a bit, just to see how we might do this session a bit better than last week. So the rules for today are: have your lesson pack downloaded and at hand to follow the lecture. If you didn't receive it, Rochelle will be popping it into the chat now. Please arrive promptly, which everyone has done. Please make sure you keep any audio devices which might cause any feedback away from your computer or your phone, whatever you're using, especially if you have audio on. This session is being live recorded, so if you don't feel comfortable being recorded, please keep your cameras off. Please feel free to use the reaction function in Zoom. Just gonna demonstrate here. So for example, if you agree with something someone is saying, just give them a clap or thumbs up. And it's a small little affirmation if you're feeling what someone is saying. If you have a question or discussion point, please type it in the web chat, and Arena, the moderator, will let you know when to unmute your microphone. Arena will go through the details on speaking and passing the space a little bit later. When voicing your question or discussion point, please, if you can, briefly introduce yourself, your name, your background, and your preferred pronouns, as I guess this will help us to be able to interact with each other a bit better. We also are encouraging you to utilize the chat function in Zoom. We see this as a second space. So if people are speaking in the video function, you can also hold discussions in the chat function. And hopefully, if you also want to have one-on-one discussions with people, you can use the private chat function in Zoom as well. Please be mindful of the space you're taking up and the length of time you're speaking for. We want everyone to share space and to be heard, and just to feel comfortable in voicing themselves. And please be respectful to everyone else's space and each other's space, and ultimately this space we're all sharing together. And at the end, please feel free to save the chat for your own personal use, and just like as a transcript of what has been discussed today. So yeah, gonna pass on to Arena, who will be introducing themselves and their practice and a quick run through of some of the moderation points today.
Hi guys, I'm Marina. I'm a visual artist currently studying at the Slade. My practice kind of predominantly focuses on painting, and its kind of focus is to recreate an archive for queer Southeast Asian people. Today I'll be moderating the question and answers part. So I won't be equipped obviously to answer some of the questions, but I'll just be passing it on between people, and we'll be helping that to make sure that everything runs smoothly. Mostly I'm just here to listen. So yeah, and my involvement with East is that I've been helping facilitate and also like help around with some of the events like Fantasy Art School that happened 2 years ago or a year ago, and some of the smaller events that have happened in between then and now.
Amazing, thank you. And now we have Maxwell Murray, who is an aspiring filmmaker, amongst many other things. They're a creative studying at DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois. So thank you so much. I think I said that, Illinois. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And we'll hand it over to you now.
All right, for sure. Good morning to everyone. I think it's probably like 11 o'clock mostly for your time. It's like 5:08 here. So mind me if I'm a little bit slower. But yeah, my name's Maxwell Murray. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, actually, but I go to school out here in Chicago. I've been to London a few times to visit it, most recently to visit my partner who studied abroad there. Really fell in love with it. I've always like played soccer my whole life, which most people will probably refer to as football. I'm an Arsenal supporter, and as stressful as that is all the time. What else is there? Yeah, I really would like to come out to London again, and get out there and connect and meet with more people, and maybe create some work at some point too. But yeah, my pronouns that I go by are he, him, and they, them. And yeah, I'm gonna get into my work. Let me share the screen real quick. All right, for sure. So one of the, my friend, when I first came to school, I'm going into my senior year, but one of my closest friends, his name's Effie. He's originally from California. He's actually originally from Nigeria. He was born in Lagos, but he grew up in LA, and he's a year younger than me. And we've always talked about this idea of creating a film specifically on ourselves. We always felt like we've never had a film that really connected to us about ourselves, that told us a story that was true. So we wanted to make a film called The Misconceptions of a Black Man, because we feel as if the world has created a image of us that we don't necessarily ascribe to, but we still feels affects us very heavily. So I'm just gonna read through this real quick. The Misconceptions of a Black Man is a film idea that aims to simultaneously demystify and empower the Black male subject in a world that has profited and prevailed off the death of Black bodies. While the main goal of this film lies within creating a space where the Black man is celebrated, it also is a space where Black men will be challenged to think about their inherent privilege in a patriarchal society. I really wanted to focus on that idea or that aspect of learning, because I feel like although like Black men have been put into a space where we have been misunderstood, where we have been forced to deal with things that we might not even have fully understood ourselves, we still have inherent privilege in this world, and we must recognize that. And especially right now, I don't know if people have been online on Twitter. I don't have Twitter and stuff like that, but I hear about it from my friends, artists like No Name arguing with like J. Cole just about the negligence of Black men right now, and recognizing Black women in their world, and recognizing how much Black women really care about them, and needing to give that care back to them in a world that doesn't care about them or recognize them at all. And then Misconceptions of a Black Man aims to examine how the world has misconceptualized the Black man, and how the Black man has made sense of himself, his world, and those around him due to those misconceptions. So yeah, it's basically just how we've been almost more of an idea than a human in this world, in the eyes of the world itself, and how we've been able to understand that. This is a piece from the Detroit Institute of Art back home. I went recently back in March around my birthday. I'm a Pisces, if anyone else is. I know people are kind of into astrology and stuff like that. But it just says, Mom says I'm her son, but specifically spelling son, not S-O-N, but S-U-N. And I think that's really influential. My film would definitely start off with poetry, I think from a Black mother, a Black woman. I think the whole film would probably be narrated by a Black woman's voice, because if anything, I feel like Black women are the most influential people in my life. They're the people who have probably made me the most into the Black man that I am today, and forced me to really think about what it means to be a Black man in this world. Not to say that the strong Black men in my life, like my father, my stepfather, my grandfather, uncles, also haven't played a strong role in that. But I think we must really recognize the power of our women and how they build us to be Black men in this world, and how they build us to love. So the idea of death of the Black male body, mind, and spirit. So going into this, it would start off focusing on this idea of invisibility of Black boyhood. I don't know if anyone's heard of the murder of Tamir Rice, but he was just very, very young, playing with literally a toy, and the police came up and shot him instantaneously. So just we lack that ability to really be children in this world, to really have innocence, to really be explorers, and to move without being policed at every moment. Which moves me into the next bullet point, which is assumed criminality of Black men. And this is from childhood all the way through. The prevalence of these two types of imagery and dominant culture's media, such as television, film, and news, especially news. I don't think there's any time when you can turn on the news that is not dominant. Like here we have NBC. I guess there you would be like BBC, stuff like that. I'm not sure exactly. But here, all we see is negative imagery of ourselves, and that really gets damaging at a certain point. So I asked the question, what does it mean when the footage of George Floyd being murdered is proliferated across the world? Do we become numb to the death of Black bodies due to seeing it happen so much, especially over such a long period of time? So here's some other pieces from the DIA that kind of go along with what I was talking about, and also represent some of the imagery that I envisioned for my film. After that shot with the poetry from the mother, it would go into still images of a young Black boy on one side and an older Black gentleman on the other side. And then it would be a very drastic cut to the unfortunate and common deaths of Black people in our world, going all the way back to times of enslavement, going through times of Jim Crow, going through times of apartheid, going through everything all the way up until the murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and everybody else that goes unmentioned. And I want it to be somewhat of a very drastic and almost shocking cut from the humanity of the Black men here and the Black boy to how they make us, how they change, what they can change us to. And I don't want that. I want us to see it, but I don't want that to discourage us. So that's why it's at the beginning. And that leads me into the next point, which is the creation of the Black man. I feel like this world has tried to build an image of what the Black man is and ought to be in this world. It is the life's purpose of the Black man to unlearn what the white man's world has forced him to take in. The demystification by taking a look at the different anti-Black stereotypes that dominant white culture has tried to use to justify its subjugation of Black male subjects on the film. I don't know if anyone's seen Ethnic Notions by Marlon Riggs, another great documentary that uses lots of archived imagery all throughout time to show a lot of the anti-Black anti-Black sentiment that has existed in America and worldwide throughout time. So yeah, this film, by Ethnic Notions, was a source of inspiration for me, just because it's a documentary by a Black queer man focused on detangling the history of these images that were quite prevalent in dominant popular culture. And how have these negative images of ourselves been conceptualized and made sense of by ourselves? I think that's a very important question going into the psyche. And is there ever an internalization of these images? I think obviously so, but what do we do to not have these internalizations dominate our world? Here's a few images, a few still shots from Ethnic Notions, just showing Black people and white minds. And again, the film that has really decided the aestheticism of Hollywood, which is The Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith. I can't remember the year that it came out, but it was one of the first films to really have Black people on screen. And it wasn't even Black people. It was the image that you see now, which is white people dressed in blackface to make mockery of what the Black human being is. Then you also have right next to that, which is a poster from a film that came out in 1939, written by the English writer Agatha Christie. And it was originally called Tin Little. But to cover that up, they changed the names and then there were none. So I don't know if that's any better, but yeah. And so going into that, knowing that we live in a world that is constantly trying to subjugate us, how can the Black men reclaim their physical, mental, and spiritual imagination? The Black man's mind, I'm just gonna read through this. The Black man's mind, body, and soul have been trapped in a box, literally and figuratively, due to the constraints of the racist, patriarchal, capitalist society we live in. And knowing this, we must challenge all Black men to be radical in thought and action as a way to reclaim their physical and mental space of imagination. What the white man's world wants is for Black men to fit perfectly into the space they have carved out for us, a space of servitude, dependence, and inferiority. Therefore, it is up to Black men to shatter what we have believed Black masculinity to be, seeing that it's been created in a world where we have not always had control. The definitions are not made in a way where they would be putting us in power. Masculinity is still a word that is formed in the patriarchal world. Therefore, it's only benefiting the men. We must imagine a world in which our manhood is not decided on how much money we have or how hard you are, but instead upon how much you love your brother and sister. We must imagine a manhood in which we do not view our own women as objects to be conquered and quantified, but humans to be nurtured and loved. I am a true believer that women, more specifically Black and brown women, hold the key to truth, and it is only until Black men and brown men recognize the inherent truths and powers of their women, we will see true change. We must imagine a Black manhood that values and stands up for Black women. That's what our Black masculinity needs to be. Not only Black women, but queer, Black, and brown people as well. So just used a little quick quote from Earl Sweatshirt or Tebe, time to organize, but you got to keep it horizontal. We're all in this together, trying to get the same goal. So what does a Black man dream, and how does he break out of his own mind? Those are a few questions that I just wanted to think about after that. And then here's a little piece. I don't really write poetry too often. I think I am also a Black man who struggles with diving into that space of imagination. Sometimes I really like very literal images because it reminds me of the history itself. But I would like to get better at connecting myself to my imagination and my past, my lineage. So I wrote this little piece. It's called What to Do with All This Rage. I remember very vividly from my youth, my father telling me not to cry. That was a door closed shut. Instead of ritualizing release, I grew accustomed to suppression. It was only last year that I learned how to shed tears again, and it's still a struggle to find the strength to let them run down my face. I often find myself trying to reject the feeling as a whole. Why am I crying? Is this even real? The feeling and act are so foreign to me that I can't even accept it as true. That is how this world made me. That is how this world made my father. It made us angry. It made us loud. It made us hurt. which made us hurt the ones that we love most simply because it has conditioned us to suppress what to do with all this rage. And I kind of ended on that open-end question just because I think the thing that we need to learn to do is just sit, instead of releasing with anger, we need to release with our love, with our feelings, and just cry. We really need to grow accustomed to breaking down. I know I do, because if I was able to break down in that way instead of, you know, I put a hole in the wall before due to my anger, and I don't even know where that anger comes from sometimes. So that's what I'm saying. Sometimes it's so abrupt and so disruptive that it's not even needed. I don't even know the root of the issue itself. So sometimes maybe we should just break down and cry. And here's a little piece from Amiri Baraka that I think represents the energy and the aestheticism and voice of what I want to do. It might not work. Oh, here we go.
Sorry, Maxwell, is there audio on the video?
Oh, sorry, did it not play? My fault.
No.
It must only be playing. It's probably because I have the headphones in.
Yeah,
so,
sorry.
Let me see. Okay. You gotta just disconnect these. One sec. Sorry, my roommates are asleep, saying that it's only 5:30 here. I'm just on another type of time. Bluetooth, turn that on. All right, sweet. And let me know if it plays now.
Rocca was emerging as a dynamic and outspoken
Can you hear that or no?
leader of the Black arts movement.
I guess not.
We can hear it.
Oh, you can? Oh, for sure.
It's all good. All good.
All right,
Thank you.
no problem.
Rocca was emerging as a dynamic and outspoken leader of the Black arts movement. Come on, niggas, come out. Help us stop the devil. Help us build a new world, niggas. Come out, brothers. Are we with you and your sons, your daughters are ours, and we are the same, all the blackness from one black Allah. When the world is clear, you'll be with us. Come out, niggas, come out. Come on, niggas, come out. It's nation time. It's nation time. It's nation time. It's nation time. Chant with bells and drums. Nation time. It's nation time. Get up, Santa Claus. Get up, Roy Wilkins. Get up, Diana Ross. Get up, Jimmy Brown. It's nation time. Build it. Get up. Get up, nigga. Get up, nigga. Come over here, nigga. Think about it, nigga. It's nation time.
So, yeah, just going into that, I think it's very imaginative in and of itself. It's almost the Black nation telling Black people themselves to get up. It's time. It's time to come fight for yourself. It's time to get up and be who you are. It's time to come join the nation. So yeah, just going after that little clip, I would like to go into my. Can you guys hear me right now too? All good?
Yeah, it's good.
For sure. Stylistic choices and influences, heavy use of archived images and footage, as I said before. I want to do this because I see it as well, obviously, just personal aestheticism and taste of myself, but also it's a direct resistance against the colonialism and its attempt to disrupt any idea of a Black continuity. So connecting ourselves to the past strictly through those images that we see on the screen, seeing the truth of our world. Nothing that's whitewashed, as well as a rejection against the institution of Hollywood. Not really with Hollywood at all.
Sorry, Maxwell, you've gone a bit quiet.
What was that?
So you've gone a bit quiet. The audio is a bit lower.
All right, true. It's probably just the headphones, so I'm gonna throw those back on. All right. Can you guys hear me now? Can you hear me or not?
Yeah, we got you.
All right, for sure.
Thank you.
So going back into the stylistic choices, heavy use of archived imagery and footage as a direct resistance against colonialism and its attempt to disrupt any idea of a Black continuity, as well as a rejection against the institution of Hollywood. This is the site right here that's linked to Black Archives, which is a Black woman-led platform which aims to provide access to Black past, present, and future. I would hopefully like to get connected with her as she's based in Chicago as well, and to talk to her and get access to just tons of imagery of Black life through time. Inspired by filmmakers such as Spike Lee, Jenin Kuru, I think that's how you pronounce it, her film Black Star Rebirth is Necessary, Daryl Daly, who I just talked to a little bit throughout this week, who's based in South London, Cheryl Dunier, Watermelon Woman is her work, one of my favorite independent films. Raoul Peck, I Am Not Your Negro, Boots Riley, Sorry to Bother You, and Rugano Inyoni, I think that's how you pronounce it. And I Am Not a Witch, which is also just an amazing work. I appreciate their ability to create an undeniably Black narrative that utilizes nonlinear storytelling. And what did I'm not sure what this link goes to, honestly, so I'm not going to click on it. But experimental in nature, compilations of my own footage used with archived imagery to create a nonlinear narrative that aims to help other Black men find purpose and truth in a world that is set up against them, also helping them to learn about new ways to express their emotions and make sense of their world, searching for imagining new ways to be Black men. And that moves me into the film that I just mentioned, Black Soap by Daryl Daly. Not sure if we can go through the whole thing, but I'll just run a quick few minutes of it, just at the quick few seconds at the beginning. Just get the quick.
It's very important to realize that Africa is an exploded star, a shattered diamond.
Sorry about that. My sorry. I don't wanna take no time to write this down. I wanna tell you how I feel right now. So yeah, I don't want to get into the whole thing because it's available through Vimeo on Instagram. I would definitely recommend it as it's a great work. Really changed my whole perspective on kind of what filmmaking could really be. Seeing that it's really a compilation of just like internet images. And I thought that was really cool. And this is something, I'm gonna actually skip over this. Maybe I can talk about it at the end, just because I feel like I've used up a lot of time. But yeah, that's kind of my work. This is just something else that I'm inspired by CareCom magazine and the CareCom Guide to Black Male Mental Health. It's one of the first works that made me really be like, oh yeah, I can make this happen. So just shout out to Calum and him doing it first, and really inspiring other Black men and other people across the world to want to go for what they believe in and also get healthier mentally at the same time. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Maxwell. That was awesome. That was really, really cool to kind of understand a little bit about where your thoughts are at, where your head's at as well. I'm really interested in like the locality, like the location that you're in as well, and how that kind of informs your work, because it's interesting seeing Daryl's work and maybe seeing how the differences may kind of show out in your work as well, because of our experiences as diaspora, but also from, you know, Black, British and African American perspectives.
No, yeah, definitely, definitely. I'm just talking to him about that too, like through Instagram. So yeah, it was really cool, but I appreciated him making that film. It was really nice to see. So, but thank you for letting me speak as well. And thank you to everyone for listening.
Thank you so much. Does anybody have any points or any questions for Maxwell, or any feedback on any points? Bonolo,
Yeah,
yes.
Bonolo, do you want to say your point?
Yep. Hi, Maxwell. Thank you so much for your presentation. I just wanted you to kind of clarify what you meant by Black continuity, and how your work essentially aims to disrupt that.
Sure. I guess what I meant by Black continuity is, like, specifically, maybe that's a little bit more of an African American perspective, I'm not sure, but from my point of view, like when I talk to my family, a big thing over in America that a lot of Black people do is like that ancestry.com thing. Like my grandmother has done it, like my uncle has, like, because we're on this road to try to like find our roots, like find where we originally came from, like who are we for real? So maybe I didn't use the correct word, I'm not sure, but my work aims to give Black people a space where even if they don't know exactly where they are from, because I don't think, at the end of the day, I don't really think that's what matters. I don't think that we have to know the exact location, the exact roots. I think just understanding the power of who we are as a whole, and understanding there's actually power in the fact that we've been disconnected and we continue to long for and search for that reestablishment of who we are. So yeah, I guess my work aims to connect the dots, if that makes more sense. Yeah, yeah, I'll use that, connect the dots.
It does make sense. Thank you.
Yeah, true. Thank you.
Oh, by the way, for people who don't have their cameras on, how we're kind of doing the discussions is you can either write R or S in brackets in the chat place, and then R will basically mean if you want me to read it out, or S will be, you know, whether you want to speak your own question out, and I will just let you know when to ask your question. Does anyone have any questions or discussion points? Yeah, Josh?
Yeah. First of all, yeah, Invisible Man is a really good book as a reference. But I was actually interested in how, because you show like your research into archival footage and also like this poem or creative writing, and is it your intention to kind of overlay these elements through your film? Because I didn't quite understand that. Yeah,
that was kind of, I guess it's a little bit tough. It's a little bit tougher through the presentation and like the Google Slides. And I've never really, that's my thing. That's kind of, this was really tough for me opening up because I've never delved deeply. It's really been an idea that's ran through my head just constantly over and over. But like if you've seen, Marlon Riggs also has a documentary called Tongues Untied. And it's almost, he, as a Black queer man growing up in America, it's almost like what I want to do, focus on Black men as a whole, but his was focused on specifically the Black gay male experience in America and untangling that. And that he used a lot of like skits, different types of camera methods, as well as poetry as well, just different. It was very experimental in how it was shot and filmed. So I would definitely recommend looking at that. But yeah, it would go from a camera shot to maybe a quick skit that I could maybe have Black men performing Black masculinity, which I would think would be very cool and very interesting. yeah, so just kind of like that, very not linear at all. Like it would go from one thing and then would go to another, and you'd almost have to try to figure it out yourself, but still connecting as a whole. So
Yeah, I think it's really beautiful how you basically you invite the viewer to like piece things together, and you also offer alternative histories, and
yeah,
I think that's a really powerful way to do it. And I think your poem was also really nice. So thanks for sharing that with us.
all right, thank you. Yeah, it was tough for me to write, but I honestly, reading it, it felt real, and I really appreciate it. I liked writing it, so thank you.
I, I think some other references that came to mind, especially in terms of using archival footage, like Arthur Jaffa, of course. I might be making this up, but I think him and Jen went to the same film university, which might make sense in terms of like aesthetic and artistic style. But obviously, yeah, Jaffa, Isaac Julian as well, in terms of like layering in terms of images. Isaac Julian is a British filmmaker and has done a lot of quite radical films. And yeah, in terms of like collaging and narrative and non-linear narratives, that could be a good reference. If you can find bits of it online, looking for Langston, maybe just like as an aesthetic style, not necessarily. Actually, no. Yes, I think no. Yeah, it is a good reference aesthetically, but in terms of the content as well, in terms of like masculinity, it basically like tries to reimagine the Harlem Renaissance, but through like a Black queer male perspective. They were showing it at Take Britain last year again. It's really hard to find online, but you'll find clips of it. I think you might be able to find it on BFI as well. Who else? John Akamfra as well. In terms of like inviting history into filmmaking and trying to like explore historical narratives through film. Yeah, those are a few references that just came to mind.
Also,
sure. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll just add from a Black British perspective, I thought of Steve McQueen as well, who has a film called Bear, which is really, really beautiful and studies kind of Black masculinity, but also from his experience, I guess it's informed by his experience as a gay man as well. So it's kind of like just really interesting to kind of look at the lines between where, like, I guess aggression can turn into like sensuality and back again. That's just my projection, but also it's really interesting to explore that one too.
Not sure. Thank you. I appreciate it all. Yeah. And then to the comment about Last Black Man in San Francisco, I grew up in the Bay a little bit too, so I really love that film. That's a great piece. Yeah. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Maxwell, and thank you everybody for getting involved and sharing your suggestions, your feedback. That was really rich. And definitely, I would encourage you to save the chat so that we have all these amazing references in our back pockets as well. So next up, just before we go into the break, we will be showing a little bit of context for our next lecture, which is by Osei Bonsu. We will be showing a film, which is a process film by a sculptor, and it comes from the 198 archive as well. And just before that, we'd like to say hi to Paula, who wants to say a few words and say hi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paula Nassif, and I am an artist, and I am the project manager at 198. Just wanted to say hi and to introduce myself and give you a little bit of context to 198 and the work that the organization does before Rachel and Hamed share the film that you're about to watch. So 198 Contemporary Arts and Learning is a arts organization and charity based in Brixton in London. 198 is a venue for the exhibition of visual arts and a community hub and arts education center. It opened in December 1988, contributing to the regeneration of Brixton following the race riots in the 80s. And since then, it's been known as a community arts space, which has helped nurture the Black arts movement into a contemporary visual arts organization. And it continues to search out artistic connection in the community and investing in emerging talents with a particular focus on the development of young people. Currently, 198 is doing a rebuilding in the premises in London, and while that's happening this year, we've been cataloging and digitizing the 30 years archive that we have. And as a part of that project, we've invited artists and collectives like East to engage with us in our archive and create community engagement projects such as this one. Originally, of course, they were supposed to be physically present, but a very exciting thing happens when things don't go as planned, and it's very nice we are doing this online, especially because, for example, you, Maxwell, was able to join us. Thank you so much for your generous contribution and for sharing your beautiful work and your ideas with us. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for those that came last time and are back. And thank you also for the new faces here today. Yeah, looking forward to Osei's lecture. And thank you, East, as well, for putting together such a beautiful program. Yeah, I hope you all enjoy, and thank you again.
Thank you. So we're gonna take a break and reconvene at 12 o'clock. But in the meantime, I'm gonna share the screen of a 198 sculpture, a sculpture commissioned by 198, which was made by the artist Raymond Watson. So I'll put this on and we will reconvene at 12.
See you then. Sorry, Hamid. I can't hear the audio for this one. Oh. Okay, got it. Yeah. Thanks.
How long have you worked on this record? What's it called? Yeah, what's it called, Red? Not a first time. Six, I can think now. This is a commission. Yeah. for what? Who and for what? Like I said, it's the copyright that that's what you say. And it's the right way. Where would it be going? Maxwell. When do you hope to finish this? We're getting back to the game. I'm getting anything with a tool. I should be getting that.
Good.
Start. So I think it's a really contentious, sort of porous, complex, I think, multi-perspectival argument and debate that's happening at the moment around anthropology and looted artifacts. And I wanted to say really two things as a kind of preface. I'm not an anthropologist. On one side, I have a background in art history, which is, as a disciplinary field, very much interlinked to anthropology, in the sense that there is some part of the practice that is situated in a discourse around object analysis, or what it means to understand cultures through objects. I guess the difference would be that as an art historian, you're not necessarily looking for patterns, you're not working with charts or demographies, you're not necessarily thinking about a people in the broader sense in relation to these objects. You're thinking more about the cult of individual genius, which comes from the Enlightenment and this idea of the artist as a kind of soul, as a soul entity. So there are kind of distinctions there that I want to make about the disciplinary differences. With regards to looted artifacts, you know, lots of my research at the moment is looking at sort of post-independence movements in West Africa, specifically Nigeria and Ghana, and how artists during post-independence found ways to think about the kind of the excavation or the extraction of objects as a kind of opportunity to reinvent a set of artistic languages. So if you take the Zaria rebels in Nigeria, or you take various groups in Ghana that were interested in these questions, all the way up to contemporary artists today like Ellen Etsui, that practices with materials that are indigenous to the African context, albeit that have come out of a post-industrial situation. There is this idea that artists are constantly trying to think of how do you make space for what is effectively a loss, what is effectively a kind of empty chasm, and fill it with something that is kind of reparative or restorative. And there are numerous artists I'll talk about that work with this kind of logic. You could think of Kader Attia in an Algerian French context. You could think of someone like Sami Balogi and the work he's doing, sort of looking at the Belgian Congo and ideas around archives. You could also look at many Black British artists that have continually dealt with the archive, often in their situation, looking at a kind of media archive about the kind of the technology of documentary film. And it's something I talk about often with John Okomfora. And I guess I'm really interested in the archive, but I'm, rather than having an archival practice curatorially, I kind of take it from the perspective of what do artists do with the archive? And I try to, I guess, approach the question with the same level of irreverence and perhaps kind of a disregard for chronology. And I'm quite interested in that because of what it does to the discipline of art history. So I was going to just talk about a few projects at Tate because it's where I'm currently situated and they're projects that are at the forefront of my mind. This is a project by William Kentridge called The Head and the Load, and it was commissioned as a response to the sort of legacy of African soldiers who participated and fought within World Wars I and II. And there were two commissions around this time, one by John Okomfora and one by William Kentridge. John's work was presented at the Imperial War Museum in London. And I guess that it's an interesting moment to think about what rights does an artist have to intervene within a specific history or cultural logic. So in this instance, you see the South African artist William Kentridge, who's known for his interest in drawing, performance art, who's really taking up the question of Dada and Dada's kind of interest in performances that could be kind of entirely based on fiction and rooted in a kind of a cultural logic that was very much about a kind of rejection of a sort of an official culture. And I think that it's interesting when you start to think about the tension between the European avant-garde, who is situated very much in the context of the 1920s and 30s, and how even though their politics wasn't always consistent with a revolutionary or a liberatory politics, in a way, the kind of tools that they introduced to the history of art, and thinking specifically about surrealism's kind of, in a way, rejection of rationality, really, gives, I think, African artists between the 1960s and 80s, really, an opportunity to kind of play with those traditions and rework them. And that's a theme that I'll come back to. The other work is a work by Kemengwela Hula, who's a South African artist also. And this was a work that was placed in the tanks, I believe, last year. And it's a work where, again, he kind of plays on this idea of historiography, and I'll happy to send out more information. But this was really to kind of give you a sense of my current curatorial context, even though these are not shows that I've worked on, they're artists that I've been thinking with and thinking around. And then obviously Kara Walker's Fons Americanus, and I was interested to see that Rihanna is going to talk, I think, next week or the following week, because, you know, not only is she someone that I sort of love to think with and talk to about such issues, but I think has kind of put a lot of weight on this particular work. And I would really encourage you all go away and read the review she wrote. I think it was for Art Review, or maybe it was Art News. But I think there's a lot of critical work being done at the moment around questions of memorials and monuments and the kind of power we give these objects or statues. And I have lots of opinions about this, and I do believe it's a case-by-case issue. So I will say in this instance, I think that there's been a lot of healthy debate and interesting debate around an African-American artist sort of taking up a sort of piece of British history and then trying to, I guess, re-articulate some of the tensions, perhaps without being aware of the historical specificity of that intervention. And I think it's an example where that tension isn't always a good tension. And I think when we're going to talk at the end a little bit about Black international art, I think it's interesting, because I guess what it gives us space to talk about is around kind of differentiations that existed historically. One was the grand debate around political blackness and what that meant or still means. And then I think another one is this idea of the international Black artist or international Blackness, because what it does is it, I think, opens up a space to think through the very important cultural specificities of lived experience, and how, even though we are part of a globally sort of active and I think critical network of artist curators nowadays who are thinking about these histories aren't always necessarily reconcilable with one another, and that we should be really attentive to one another's differences, even when we're trying to open up spaces for dialogue and kind of deeper critique and discourse. So that's just one issue that I would touch on. And then to kind of go a little bit into my curatorial practice and how it relates to anthropology. So I started out as an assistant curator. I worked with mostly around contemporary African art, but sometimes modern African art when it was possible. And one of the early projects I was lucky enough to work on was an exhibition curated at Innova. It was actually the last show to happen at Innova before it lost part of its funding and moved to its current into its current form at Chelsea College of Art. So this was a project called Issa Som, From the Ethics of Acting to the Empire Without Signs. And Issa Som is a Senegalese artist who was active in the 1960s, who really, after the kind of revolutionary moment of Senghor and the introduction of artistic culture as being imperative to Senegal's kind of, let's say, specific idea of independence, kind of rejected official state culture because he didn't believe that it was consistent with the kind of political possibilities of art making in Senegal specifically. So he took to making work that was more akin to, let's say, Viennese actionism, that was agitprop, that used kind of theatre. He created temporary sets, invited other artists to collaborate on creating kind of spatial environments in a courtyard in the center of Dakar, and really became the kind of spirit of the avant-garde in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, and was very much associated with the group Laboratoire Agitat, who were really known for their kind of experimental and deeply transgressive performances. So this was a work that I was assisting Koyo Kuo, who's a Senegalese curator, in bringing to London. And it's a really rich and insightful project, I think, worth looking into his practice more generally as kind of an example of an artist whose work is kind of, let's say, parallel to historical debates around decolonization and African liberation, but who isn't interested in the symbolic properties of African liberation. So he's not creating images of wives and their sort of mothers and children, which were very much specific to, let's say, a West African context. He wasn't interested in flora and fauna or images of nature. These are images that are deeply, in a way, unsettling in the way that they recall ideas of political independence that aren't about necessarily a positive image. They're about a more complicated political history. And this is his courtyard, where he was a very active figure. And I think it's interesting to think about this artist, because his work was intersected so much with anthropology. And I was speaking recently with a friend who happens to be a scholar in the US, and he says most people think of the field of African art studies as kind of having existed since, let's say, sort of the early 20th century. It's actually not true. the study of African art history as we know it today really began in the 1990s. It began with a series of critical journals like Unka out of Cornell University and Duke University, Revue Noire, which came out of Paris, run famously by the French curator Simone Gemi, that were all really kind of bringing the work of post-independence artists to critical attention, because what had happened before that is that African artists were only seen through an anthropological lens. So you would go and you would take a degree in anthropology or ethnography, and you'd apply those same critical tools to living artists. So there was a hugely, I think, ethnographic fetishization of African art in the really all the way up until the end of the 80s, which is, it's really interesting when you think about how those discourses sort of unfold side by side, especially specifically with respect to where we are today. So after working on that project, I've been asked to work on a show at Saatchi Gallery, and was lucky enough that that publication was picked up by a well-known curator, Okwin Wezel, who's sadly no longer with us. And he then asked me if I'd be his assistant in an exhibition called All the World's Futures, which was the title of the Venice Biennale for 2015. It was its 56th edition. So All the World's Futures was a show that very ambitiously was kind of trying to capture the turbulence, the kind of perpetual turbulence of our times, long before COVID and the kind of acceleration of let's say, the political appeal of Black Lives Matter. And it was just asking this idea, or not simply just asking, but it was asking many things, but among them were these ideas, sort of how do artists respond to the kind of clamor of humanity as it accelerates, as it kind of doubles back on itself, and in a way as history starts to repeat. So he used a Paul Klee painting as a kind of symbol of a sort of bird flying over the ruins, and what does it mean to kind of create out of a ruinous contemporaneity. So one of the works that came out of that project was Sami Balogi's The Other Memorial. And it's a work made out of copper, which was the chief export of the Belgian Congo, with and then embedded into this sort of monument, or the memorial, was the kind of scarification that's indigenous to the Congo that was used during the reign of King Leopold, where people were not only put in extremely unthinkably dangerous and debased situations, but could lose limbs, could lose flesh as a result of their kind of let's say political revolt. So in this specific work, you see a work that brings together the flesh of the human with the copper, which is the industrial export. And I think it's a really evocative example of a kind of temporary monument that doesn't exist within a space of, it exists within a space of temporality that's more complicated than being simply about the memorialization of history. And that's something that I'm really interested in, kind of objects that can do lots of things at the same time when it comes to dealing with issues of anthropology and the looting of cultural artifacts. This is a work by the Egyptian artist N'Jie Flatoun, who was a surrealist who basically broke rank with her bourgeois background. Her mum was a dressmaker and she was of an aristocratic ilk, but found herself in prison for being imprisoned for effectively joining the resistance movement, and then found herself creating paintings while in prison and asking the guards if she could paint. And while she was painting, she was creating these very scenic images of a kind of a vision of Egypt within which women had more political freedom, and that the kind of richness of the landscape was very much part of her, let's say, sort of psycho-social understanding of a free country. So she was a deeply influential artist whose work I keep coming back to as being a really interesting example of a North African artist who's kind of working in parallel and thinking about the relationships between the European avant-garde and African modernism and how those two things are entangled. And then after working on those projects, I became officially independent because I was no longer an assistant to sort of other curators, more established curators. And I had an opportunity to work in Paris on a series of exhibitions which were titled The Economy of Living Things, Économie du Vivant. So this was an exhibition really looking at the idea of migration, and this is in the cultural context of pre-Brexit, the moment where David Cameron is referring to the migrants seeking refuge in the UK and other parts of Europe as swarms. There was a kind of very dehumanizing rhetoric around this idea of what it meant to care for another human. And I wanted to think about this not in a way of looking at art that deals with migration, but looking at artists who are interested in the processes of migration as they relate to several types of, several sort of schemas that are happening both in the natural world, in music, in archaeology, in dance, in cinema. And it really took me to 4 distinct practices, and it was a commissioning program. So the first one was Ali Cheri's Somnicula. So Ali Cheri is a French Lebanese artist whose work really deals with questions around sort of not only that are specific to Lebanon, where he grew up, but are specifically about the kind of political relationships between, let's say, the Maghreb region and the international world, both politically and kind of geopolitically and sort of socially. And in this particular work, Somniculus, which is Latin for light sleep, he's looking at the cultural relations between, sorry, it's a siren going off, so I'll wait for it to pass by. I think that, feels like it's coming closer rather than, there we go. So I think it's a work in which he's really thinking about this idea of what kind of consciousness does an object have. So in Somniculus, he sort of situated his own body within the context of 2 culturally distinct French museums. One is the Museum of Mankind, and the other is the Musée de Quai Branly. And all of them hold objects that are kind of unthinkable within our cultural context of the moment. Musée de Quai Branly is a museum that is specifically dedicated towards world cultures, and its collection is very much founded upon the 19th century sort of colonial expeditions, meaning that many of its objects are untraceable to their source, and there is a huge debate going on at the moment around which objects are repatriated, and if so, in what context, how is this done? And there's a report that you can read on this by a fellow in SAR, and it's I think just a really interesting debate that I think is specific to the French context, and I'd like to see us start to think about this in a British context, but I think each European country has to think distinctly about how it can facilitate those dialogues, because in the French context, there is still a very active relationship between, let's say, former French territories or existing French territories, and the kind of, you could say, the sort of the former colonial headquarters that is, modern day France. And I think that in Britain, we have a slightly more uncomfortable, probably rightly so, relationship with our former territory. So it's worth, I think, really looking at the specificities of those currents. But in this work, Ali Cheri situates himself in the museum as an object, and kind of he's sleeping among the objects in a light sleep in order to, in a way, transgress the state of, in a way, human consciousness to enter the world of the anthropological or the anthropomorphic object. So there are lots of things that are really important about this work, and it ended up being acquired by the Centre Pompidou, and it became a kind of really, I think, a key work for the artist in terms of how he was developing his language in relation to thinking about video as this kind of portal into a kind of a world of things, a world of ideas. So that's one of the projects. The other project with Oscar Murillo is Structures Resonantes, Resonant Structures, that was presented first at the CAPC in Bordeaux and then at the Jules Pomme in Paris with 2 different iterations. And it was the second time he really introduced these effigies that were later shown at, I think it was Turner Contemporary as a result of his nomination for the Turner Prize, but this was the second time that they were shown, I think. And it was, I think, probably 2 years prior, but these effigies are effectively a kind of labor force. They make up the men and women who worked in and around La Paila in Colombia, around the Colombina factory where Oscar Murillo's parents worked for several years before his family relocated to London. And in this work, he's asking lots of interesting questions. He basically asked his father to recount the story of moving to London without any English language, without any connections, without any sort of means to provide for his family, and translated that same story into, I think we did about eight different languages, and maybe there are more being done as we speak. But it was a work in which you enter a dark room and you hear the voices of several people, women, men, recounting the stories of migration of a very specific sort of pathway of migration of a Colombian man who came to the UK with his family, I believe, when Oscar was maybe 9 or 10, but in different languages being spoken by people who are not speaking in their native tongue. So it was a really evocative work, and I think a really rich work that allowed Oscar to kind of deepen the sort of socio-political content of his work in hopefully a meaningful way. And I think that it was a work that, again, is dealing with that kind of question of how one makes space for, in a way, the restitution of cultural memory, not through the object. In this case, it's an effigy, which traditionally you would burn, a voice, which, as we know, is immaterial, and yet the power, the kind of inference is the same. The potential for a kind of restorative shift, psychoanalytically, you could say, is still happening there. There is still this idea of a culture surviving, despite there not necessarily being the presence of museological artifacts. And then another work that we presented in that series was a commission by Stephanie Jemison that was produced for this, and then was later shown at the Whitney Biennale, and then I think acquired by the Whitney Museum of American Art. Is a work called Census Planier. So I worked with Stephanie on this for a year, and basically she worked with Susan Webb and the Mime Ministry of Harlem. So Susan Webb is an ordained minister who works with a group of mime artists in Harlem to create effectively performances around the idea of divinity. So very much linked to gospel music, the same way you would see a gospel choir perform in a church. But they're performing mime, and obviously mime is a tradition that extends from the Belle Époque, from the end of the 19th century in France, with a specific kind of relationship to the avant-garde, in fact, that then is being carried over to the African-American context and mixed with West African dance and West African performance. So Stephanie and I were really interested in kind of what does that mean? What does it mean to bring together these two sort of forms in a way that are almost kind of in and of themselves deeply culturally specific, and think about what happens when they're embodied by a single individual as a kind of vessel for her faith. And I think it was a really interesting performance. It involves the art. You see the artist kind of preparing, the performer preparing for the performance, and then you see a full performance which is slowed down to almost make it look kind of like a slow death. There's something very tragic about the work. If you look at Stephanie Jemison's work, she's a really, really interesting artist based in Brooklyn in New York, who's really kind of mining histories of the Black avant-garde in ways that I think most African-American artists haven't been able to do until now. She's looking at vast archives, she's looking at specific historiographies that are incredibly, I think, powerful in terms of how they look at a tradition of African-American culture that you simply don't see within mainstream culture, and how they're equally rich but also complex in the way that they intersect with other forms of avant-garde and other forms of practice. And then the other work I wanted to show you, which was commissioned in that series, is by the Berlin-based, American-born Palestinian artist Jumana Mana, who is a force to be reckoned with, an incredible artist, filmmaker, sculptor, who really presented this work, Wild Relatives, which was already actually in the research process, but the screening of the work happened for the first time within the context of the economy of living things. And it's a work where she's really looking at the kind of geography of seeds and the practice of seed banking between the Svalbard in Norway and Lebanon. And she's looking specifically at the kind of Doomsday Vault, a famous sort of name that's given to a seed bank that holds, a huge quantity of the world's seeds in Norway, mostly run by multinational NGOs around the world, who basically are, in a way, keeping stock of these seeds to ensure that in the event of a kind of human catastrophe, that nations are protected. Ironically, it's often the nations who are providing those seeds who aren't protected by the system of the Doomsday Vault. So I think Jumana Mana in this work was kind of looking very poetically at the process of harvesting all the way until the point of where it gets stored within the bank. And she's looking specifically at the migrant workers who farm the seeds, the scientific banks that hold them. And then in one of the final scenes of the work, you see a priest in conversation with a scientist, really talking about this idea of the arguments that are ongoing between religion and sort of scientific reason, and which holds up. And they're having this very, in a way, almost a kind of coffee table talk, but in front of the vault in Svalbard. So that there's something really evocative about this work. I'm so glad now that it's being shown in lots of places around the world. Then after that, I worked on a project with Daneo Seshibo-Pepe, which was called When Spirituality Was a Baby. And we'd worked on that project for about 2 years. And it deals slightly with this idea of cultural restitution, because we were working in an observatory dome, and 19th century observatory dome in Edinburgh with a gallery called Collective Gallery. And for the project, Daneo, who is a South African artist from Limpopo, who basically kind of started out as primarily a video artist, but whose practice has now expanded into let's say kind of non-Western centric ideas of cosmology, histories of sovereignty. She's done an incredible work that some of you might have seen at the Sharjah Biennale around the Haitian Revolution and Monument to the Haitian Revolution. And it's kind of looking at these histories of Pan-Africanism, but again, in a way that's not necessarily symbolic or illustrative, but through the materials, through the objects, through the kind of the power of the memorial as a shrine in a way. So this work, When Spirituality Was a Baby, involved the artist drawing out her own astrological chart on the ground alongside the cracks that were left in the floor from the previous use. This was in an old observatory dome, as I mentioned, and really mapping it out using clay, honey, mud bricks, mud patty, candle wax, beeswax, earth, which were all kind of drawn out in a very poetic way. So, and a side projector, sounds of various African rivers, sounds of the local environment, all being kind of brought together in this incredible kind of concoction, this very experiential space that it would be very, very difficult to do in a museum like Tate Modern, but in an art centre like Collective, which is in Edinburgh, was much more feasible. These are some more slides of that work. And then finally, before we go out to Q&A, because I'm aware that some of you might have questions, I don't know, maybe some things I haven't explained very clearly, but I wanted to kind of look at this question, international Black art, because I'm extremely skeptical of it in one sense, and oddly at the same time extremely supportive of that idea. And I guess it's because lots of my interests, both at a theoretical and a curatorial level, stem from histories of Pan-Africanism, but I'm interested in how circuits of solidarity and sovereignty relate directly to the political struggles of specific, let's say, Black Afro-Caribbean societies, but very much on their own terms. I'm not interested in the kind of smoothing out of difference that would suggest that Black people in West Africa have experienced the same political trials and continue to experience the same political trials and tribulations as their North American counterparts, because it's simply not true. And there are things being done unto Black bodies in different contexts that have very different political and social and economic ramifications. So I really want to clarify that. But I wanted to take you to a work that's in the Tate's collection that I think is a really interesting kind of key to thinking about this. It's a work that was gifted anonymously by the African-American artist Fred Wilson, who's known for his interventions into archives, into museums. And it's basically a series of canvases on which he's kind of drawn out or painted every single African flag, but in a kind of monochromatic white, where all you see is the outline of the flag, and then it's displayed as a kind of constellation. So it's a kind of united African nations, as it were, but without any of the color, which, as we all know, for those of us who identify with different flags, the sort of jarring idea that the color's been erased. So what does it mean to look at these flags kind of symbolically as kind of optical abstractions? And I guess why I'm interested in that is that it's kind of tabula rasa for thinking about identity, and a kind of resetting. And it's a work that I've been sort of doing lots of research on, thinking about Fred Wilson, and then thinking about which other works kind of do that in terms of their kind of non-compliance, or they're not willing to subscribe to an easy political narrative when it comes to ideas of how we perceive of Black identity in our contemporary context. The other work I wanted to bring up very briefly was Dina Lawson, an artist who's primarily working in photography, who recently shot a series of portraits in Ghana, one of which is of a woman with beads, and it's a work that kind of, I think, recalls the early anthropological ethnographic photography of the 19th century, but it's being done by an African-American artist in Ghana. What does it mean when the same kind of tactics or techniques of photography of the 19th century are being used when they're applied by an African-American artist to a Black subject with whom that artist might not feel any sense of relationality, and the politics of that I find so interesting. This other work that feels like it came straight out of Beyonce's Black is King is a kind of another work called Chief by Dina Lawson, where you see a chief, presumably, although we don't know, because if this man is anything like my family, there are lots of people who give themselves titles in womanist and not always solicited. But what I like is on one side you've got a kind of a version of the Last Supper on one side, and then obviously a chief who is very much sort of positioned in a kind of royal stance, and yet he's in a setting that's entirely domestic. And that's very, I think, indicative of how African society looks today, that you have this very strange kind of friction between indigenous cultures, tribes, indeed villages in which there are still reigning monarchs, but who live among their community in ways that aren't necessarily remarkable, and they're not necessarily about a rhetoric of Black excellence that has kind of been thrusted on Africa from I would say, quite a diasporic perspective. So I'm interested in the politics of these kinds of images. An artist like Faustin Linyukula, a work called More that was presented at a dance festival, and sadly his work that was due to be presented at Tate just before lockdown sadly was now online to view, but this is another work, and an artist who's looking also at the Belgian Congo, but through histories of dance and performance, and is kind of using his body as a kind of mechanism for storytelling or history making. And then an artist like Maud Salter, who's sadly no longer with us, but a diasporic artist who is equally kind of, I think, just brilliant in the way in which she questioned this uneasy relationship. And specifically here, looking at, it's a photographic print, obviously it's in its composition, it's like a collage, but it has the kind of remnants of several different stories that relate to the artist's biography, to her own call for kind of ancestry or belonging, but in ways that aren't necessarily about decoding a narrative that's easy for the audience to find. It's about kind of posing questions in a way through the juxtaposition of images. So I think with that, I'm going to stop sharing the screen if I can. Stop share. Okay. And that's it. So I don't know if there are any questions or, I don't know, things that are unexplained, but I'd be happy to hear from you. Are we on time?